right heat. White linen, the crisp, refreshing fragrance from Estee Lauder.
You know how to wear it.
If you remember your mom getting ready in the morning, spraying perfume from a fancy bottle and smelling all day, welcome home. You lived through the 70s. These weren't weak sprays. They stayed strong for hours. And when you grew up then, these 30 perfumes suddenly disappeared. Let's rediscover these forgotten perfumes from the 1970s. The 1973 perfume counter wasn't just retail space. It was a declaration of independence when Charlie became the first fragrance marketed to working women who didn't ask permission to wear pants, earn salaries, or smell anything other than what they chose. Mother didn't need fragrance consultants or scent profiles to know Charlie meant freedom. She smelled the sharp citrus opening mixed with jasmine and sandalwood on her wrist at the Macy's counter, felt the cool glass bottle in her palm, and bought it because the scent said she worked, earned her own money, and made her own choices. Nobody taught this selection method. She learned it by instinct the year she got her first paycheck and wanted a scent that didn't smell like her mother's generation. One bottle cost $8.50 in 1973, $58 today, and lasted 3 months of daily wear. What it meant: scent was chosen by personal identity, not by marketing algorithms or celebrity endorsements. By 1995, celebrity fragrances and focus-grouped scents replaced the instinct for choosing perfume by feeling. With time, modern fragrance didn't improve the ability to select scent by identity. It replaced it. What once lived in wrists, held under noses at counters, was outsourced to influencer recommendations, and a quiet human ability was lost completely. The 1972 fragrance wasn't just perfume. It was a rebellion when Jovan Musk Oil broke every rule about how women should smell by releasing heavy, animalic musk that department stores called too sexual, and teenage girls wore anyway because it smelled like bodies, not flowers. Grandmother didn't need age-appropriate fragrance guidelines or wearability ratings to know Jovan Musk meant freedom from floral expectations. She smelled the thick, skin-warm musk on her daughter's neck at dinner, felt the shocking intimacy of a scent that smelled like sweat and desire instead of roses, and realized perfume had stopped being about smelling nice and started being about smelling real. Nobody approved this scent choice. Her daughter learned it by rebellion, the year she stopped wanting to smell like her mother's Chanel. One small bottle cost $6 in 1972, $44 today, and lasted 6 months because musk oil was concentrated. What it meant: scent was worn for self-expression, not for approval from others. By 1998, clean fragrances and office-appropriate scents replaced the instinct for wearing smell that reflected sexuality. With time, modern perfume didn't improve the freedom to smell animalic. It sanitized it. What once lived in necks that wore musk unapologetically was outsourced to HR guidelines, and a quiet human ability disappeared entirely. The 1975 glass bottle wasn't just packaging, it was architecture when Halston's perfume came in a minimalist teardrop designed by Elsa Peretti, and the scent inside matched the bottle's modernism with sharp green notes, aldehydes, and oak moss that smelled nothing like the heavy florals women were supposed to wear. Mother didn't need perfume pyramids or fragrance families to know Halston meant sophistication. She held the smooth glass teardrop at the Bloomingdale's counter, smelled the cold, aldehydic opening that burned her nose before warming into mint and woods, and bought it because the scent matched Studio 54, not church socials. Nobody explained aldehydes to her. She learned it by feeling, the year she realized perfume could smell like ambition instead of femininity. One bottle cost $17.50 in 1975, $98 today, and the glass alone made it worth keeping forever. What it meant: scent was chosen for artistic value, not just for smelling pleasant. By 2000, fruity florals and mass-market accessibility replaced the instinct for choosing perfume as art. The 1970s bathroom wasn't just functional, it was ritual when Jean Naté after-bath splash became the scent of post-shower mornings, and every woman splashed lemon verbena coolness on damp skin, because air conditioning was expensive and wet fragrance made summer heat bearable. Grandmother didn't need body mists or cooling sprays to know Jean Naté meant refreshment. She smelled the sharp lemon and herbs mixing with soap on her arms after bathing, felt the alcohol evaporate and cool her skin instantly, and splashed it everywhere because the ritual of scent after bathing was as important as bathing itself. Nobody marketed this as skincare. She learned it by necessity. The summer air conditioning broke, and cool fragrance was the only relief from heat. One large bottle cost $3.50 in 1975, $20 today, and lasted all summer because you splashed, not sprayed. What it meant, scent was functional refreshment, not just decorative fragrance. By 2005, body sprays and aerosol mists replaced the instinct for liquid splash cooling. With time, modern products didn't improve the ritual of scent as cooling, they compressed it into aerosol convenience. What once lived in palms that splashed liquid was outsourced to spray nozzles, and a quiet human ability was lost forever. The 1974 teenage fragrance wasn't just sweet. It was controversial when Love's Baby Soft launched with powder pink bottles and ads showing young girls in soft focus, while the tagline suggested innocence was seductive, and the scent smelled like baby powder, vanilla, and something the FTC investigated for sexualizing childhood. Teenage girls didn't need age verification or parental guidance to know Love's Baby Soft meant fitting in. They smelled the talc-heavy sweetness on their best friend's neck at school, felt the strange contradiction of a scent that was both innocent and knowing, and wore it anyway because everyone else did, and smelling like baby powder somehow felt grown up. Nobody questioned the marketing. They learned it by peer pressure, the year every locker room smelled identical. One bottle cost $2.50 in 1974, $15 today, and every teenage girl owned one. What it meant, scent was tribal identification, not individual expression. By 2010, age-appropriate marketing and reformulations replaced the instinct for wearing controversial scents collectively. The 1971 Chanel counter wasn't just selling perfume. It was selling the opposite of what women were supposed to smell like when No. 19 launched as Coco Chanel's rebellion against her own No. 5, replacing oriental sweetness with icy green galbanum, iris, and vetiver that smelled like frost, leather, and refusal. Mother didn't need warm, inviting, or likable to know No. 19 meant power. She stood at the counter in a Pittsburgh department store, smelled the shocking green coldness that most women said was too masculine, felt the leathery dry-down that smelled nothing like flowers, and bought it because the scent said she didn't care if men found her approachable. Nobody recommended this as wearable. She learned it by defiance, the year she got promoted and wanted a scent that smelled like her new office, not her old kitchen. One bottle cost $22 in 1971, $165 today, and it was the most expensive thing she owned besides her winter coat. The 1975 fragrance advertisement wasn't just marketing, it was a philosophy when John II launched with commercials showing women running through meadows in slow motion, while the tagline promised the most sensual feeling you'll ever wear. And the scent delivered soft florals, woods, and musk that smelled like skin heated by sun. Grandmother didn't need sensuality marketing or romantic narratives to know John Toohey meant something different than Charlie's Independence. She smelled the warm floral wood on her wrist at the drugstore, felt how it disappeared into skin instead of projecting outward. The 1977 perfume name wasn't subtle. It was direct when Fabergé launched Babe with commercials featuring women saying, "I'm a babe," while wearing a scent that mixed peach, apricot, orange blossom, and musk in a combination that smelled like fruit, skin, and confidence that didn't require explanation. Mother didn't need empowerment seminars or self-affirmation to know Babe meant owning attractiveness without apology. She smelled the fuzzy peach opening on her wrist at the mall, felt the warm musk dry down that stayed close to skin, and bought it because the scent matched saying, "I'm attractive and I know it," without waiting for someone else to say it first. Nobody taught this confidence. She learned it by example, watching other women wear Babe like a statement that didn't require validation from anyone who smelled it. One bottle cost $8 in 1977, $39 today, and the name on the bottle mattered as much as the liquid inside. What it meant, scent reinforced identity through naming. Wearing something called Babe was a daily affirmation that you were, in fact, a babe, regardless of who agreed. By 2010, anonymous fragrance names and gender-neutral marketing replaced the instinct for wearing boldly named scents. With time, modern perfume didn't improve confidence, it neutralized it. What once lived in bottles that declared "Babe" was outsourced to numbered collections and abstract names, and a quiet human ability disappeared entirely. The 1973 perfume industry wasn't ready for Ciara, a scent that launched when most fragrances were either ladylike florals or fresh citruses, and Revlon released a heavy oriental with oak moss, spices, amber, and musk that smelled like incense, sex, and night rather than day. Grandmother didn't need fragrance categories or wear time recommendations to know Ciara wasn't for morning. She smelled the dark, spiced amber on her sister's wrist at Thanksgiving dinner, felt how it filled rooms and announced presence before the wearer arrived, and bought it because some scents were meant for evenings when you wanted to be remembered, not for afternoons when you wanted to blend in. Nobody explained Oriental fragrances. She learned it by observation, noticing how certain scents changed the mood of spaces they entered. One bottle cost $7.50 in 1973, $51 today, and one spray was enough for an entire evening. What it meant, scent had timing. Morning fragrances were one thing, evening fragrances were completely different. Ciara was never meant for daylight. It was designed for dim rooms, long dinners, and moments when projection wasn't a problem. It was the point. By 2005, all-day fragrances and office-appropriate scents replaced the instinct for matching perfume to time of day. With time, modern fragrance didn't improve versatility. It erased context. What once lived in knowing when to wear heavy orientals was outsourced to one-scent-fits-all marketing, and a quiet human ability vanished completely. The 1970s television wasn't complete without Wind Song commercials showing women walking away while men turned to watch, and the tagline whispered, "I can't seem to forget her. Wind Song stays on my mind," while the scent itself mixed aldehydes, florals, and spice in a combination that smelled like memory rather than presence. Mother didn't need sillage charts or longevity ratings to know Wind Song meant leaving an impression. She smelled the aldehydic floral on her aunt's coat after she'd left the room, felt how the scent lingered in spaces bodies had vacated, and bought it because some perfumes weren't about smelling good while you were there. They were about being remembered after you left. Nobody explained olfactory memory. She learned it by experience, noticing how certain scents haunted rooms long after their wearers disappeared. One bottle cost $5 in 1975, $28 today, and the advertising was more memorable than most perfumes smell today. What it meant, Scent was designed for absence as much as presence. Windsong wasn't meant to smell strong when you wore it. It was meant to linger after you left, creating olfactory memory that kept you in someone's mind hours later. By 2012, fast-fading fragrances and reapplication culture replaced the instinct for wearing scents that haunted spaces. With time, modern perfume didn't improve longevity. It shortened it to sell more bottles. What once lived in coats that smelled like women who'd left hours ago was outsourced to hourly respraying, and a quiet human ability was lost forever. The 1978 perfume bottle wasn't just glass and liquid. It was evidence of how corporations sold exhaustion as empowerment when Enjoli launched with commercials showing women singing about bringing home bacon, cooking it, and seducing men, while the scent itself became irrelevant compared to the message that women could smell like doing 3 jobs simultaneously. Mother didn't need perfume to know she was tired. She felt the ache in her back from standing at the stove after 8 hours at the office, smelled the bergamot jasmine on her wrist that was supposed to make overwork feel glamorous, and recognized the lie. That fragrance was being marketed as a solution to impossible expectations instead of as personal pleasure. Nobody taught her to read this manipulation. She learned it by living it. The year she worked full-time, cooked every meal, and realized the perfume industry wasn't selling scent. It was selling the idea that exhaustion could smell attractive. What it meant: women once possessed the ability to smell corporate manipulation in fragrance marketing, to recognize when perfume wasn't about identity, but about selling overwork as achievement. By 2015, the same message got repackaged as empowerment fragrances and boss babe scents. With time, modern marketing didn't improve honesty. It learned better words to hide the same exploitation. What once lived in women who smelled Enjoli and felt tired was outsourced to Instagram ads that still sell overwork as success, and a quiet human ability to detect manipulation through scent marketing was lost completely. The 1970s perfume counter didn't just sell fragrance. It revealed which scents were socially acceptable and which crossed lines when intimate sat on shelves smelling like heavy musk, amber, and skin after intimacy rather than flowers before it. Grandmother didn't need bedroom fragrance categories to know intimate was too honest for daylight. She smelled the warm musk amber on her friend's neck at Saturday afternoon coffee, felt the uncomfortable awareness of a scent that announced sexuality instead of hiding it, and understood the social boundary. Some perfumes were meant for public spaces, and some were meant for private moments, and women who wore bedroom scents in daylight were saying something others pretended not to hear. Nobody taught this olfactory literacy. She learned it by observation, reading the slight tension when someone wore intimate to church, noticing how certain scents changed conversations without words being spoken. What it meant: women once possessed the ability to read social context through scent, to know which perfumes were appropriate for which spaces, not through rules, but through collective olfactory awareness that lived in noses, not in marketing guidelines. By 2018, the concept of inappropriate scent disappeared entirely when clean musks made everything smell like nothing. With time, modern fragrance didn't improve freedom. It eliminated meaning. What once lived in noses that could read social boundaries through smell was outsourced to fragrances that communicated nothing, and a quiet human ability to understand scent as social language was lost completely. The 1975 perfume name wasn't decorative, it was instructional when Eviance Night Musk told women exactly when to wear it, and the heavy synthetic musk amber told everyone else exactly what those nights meant. Mother didn't need event-specific fragrance guides to know Aviance night. Musk wasn't for grocery shopping or church. She smelled the dense musk wood on her sister's wrist before a Saturday evening date, felt how the scent projected across rooms and announced intentions without spoken words, and recognized the olfactory language. Some perfumes were morning, some were evening, and some specifically meant the evening would end differently than it started. Nobody explained this temporal scent literacy. She learned it by collective understanding, the way entire generations knew which smells meant which activities without needing TikTok reviews or influencer guidance. What it meant, women once possessed the ability to match scent to time and intention through instinct rather than marketing, to communicate plans through smell in ways everyone understood without explanation. By 2020, the concept of time-appropriate fragrance disappeared when all-day scents made morning and evening smell identical. With time, modern perfume didn't improve versatility. It erased temporal meaning. What once lived in wrists that knew 7 p.m. required different scent than 7 a.m. was outsourced to one-scent-fits-all bottles, and a quiet human ability to communicate through time-specific smell was lost completely. The 1970s grandmother's vanity wasn't a museum. It was proof of olfactory loyalty when Emeraude sat there for decades, its heavy oriental orange blossom vanilla spice unchanged, while younger generations bought new perfumes annually and called grandmother's scent old, without understanding that smelling the same for 50 years wasn't failure, it was identity. Teenage granddaughters didn't need generational studies to know Emeraude meant old age. They hugged grandmother on Sunday visits, inhaled the thick-spiced floral that clung to her coat and permeated her bedroom, and promised themselves they'd never smell like that, not understanding that Emeraude wasn't about smelling young or current. It was about olfactory consistency so complete that you could recognize her blindfolded, that her smell was as reliable as her presence. Nobody taught this lifetime loyalty. Grandmother learned it from her era. The generation that understood one perfume worn for decades meant you knew who you were and didn't need constantly changing scent to prove identity. What it meant, women once possessed the ability to become inseparable from their scent, to wear one perfume so long it became part of their identity rather than their accessory. By 2010, fragrance wardrobes and scent rotation culture replaced this understanding entirely. With time, modern perfume collecting didn't improve self-knowledge. It fragmented identity into 40 bottles. What once lived in women who smelled identical for 50 years was outsourced to collections where no scent lasted long enough to become identity, and a quiet human ability to become a smell instead of wearing one was lost forever. The 1970s perfume name wasn't marketing strategy. It was honest warning when Dana called it taboo and delivered exactly what forbidden meant. Heavy oriental clove patchouli amber that smelled like incense, sweat, and everything women weren't supposed to acknowledge they did behind closed doors. Mother didn't need transgressive branding to know taboo meant crossing lines. She smelled the dark, spiced musk on her co-worker's wrist at the office holiday party, felt how it mixed with cigarette smoke and cheap wine to create an atmosphere that said, "Different rules apply tonight," and understood the olfactory signal. Some perfumes announced respectability and some announced its deliberate absence. Nobody taught her to read perfume as rebellion. She learned it by experience, noticing how taboo-wearing women got different reactions at family dinners, how the clove patchouli specifically communicated, "I've stopped performing for you," without needing words. What it meant, Women once possessed the ability to read perfume as communication about values, sexuality, and social rebellion, to understand that scent could announce refusal without speaking. By 2016, the concept of provocative perfume disappeared when everything became acceptable and therefore meaningless. With time, modern fragrance didn't improve freedom. It eliminated the ability to provoke. What once lived in bottles that announced forbidden and meant it was outsourced to fragrances that offend nobody and communicate nothing, and a quiet human ability to smell like deliberate rebellion was lost completely. The 1970s drugstore perfume aisle wasn't luxury territory. It was where class boundaries became visible when Chantilly sat between cheap body sprays offering aldehydic lemon powder florals that smelled almost like Chanel No. 5, except it cost what working-class women could actually afford. Grandmother didn't need prestige marketing to know Chantilly meant dignity without wealth. She smelled the bright lemon floral aldehydes on her wrist at the Woolworth's counter, recognized the same chemical structure as department store French perfumes, and understood what corporations didn't want acknowledged, that expensive and cheap perfumes often used identical aroma chemicals, and the price difference was packaging and prestige, not smell. Nobody taught her aroma chemical literacy. She learned it by comparison, smelling Chantilly next to Chanel and realizing her nose couldn't justify the price gap, that working-class women possessed the olfactory ability to detect when luxury was real versus when it was marketing. What it meant: women once possessed the ability to smell through class hierarchies, to recognize when expensive perfumes weren't better, just more expensive, and to choose dignity in scent regardless of income, without corporations telling them cheap meant inferior. By 2012, prestige versus mass market became olfactory fact when reformulations made drugstore perfumes smell noticeably cheaper. With time, corporations didn't improve quality differences, they created them deliberately. What once lived in noses that could smell identical aldehydes across price points was outsourced to actual chemical differences designed to justify luxury pricing, and a quiet human ability to find dignity in affordable scent was eliminated completely. The 1971 perfume counter wasn't selling conventional femininity when Aromatics Elixir arrived smelling like wet forest floor, dark green oak moss patchouli rose that refused to smell sweet, pretty, or approachable in an era when department stores insisted women should smell like flowers, not forests. Mother didn't need perfume education to know Aromatics Elixir was rejection of every expectation about feminine scent. She smelled the shocking green moss opening at the cosmetics counter, felt how it refused to perform prettiness or likability, and recognized what the fragrance communicated: that some women cared more about smelling interesting than smelling attractive, that intellect could have a scent, and that perfume didn't have to make men comfortable. Nobody called it witchy in the marketing. Co-workers did, women who asked, "Are you into herbs or something?" Because apparently women who smelled like earth instead of flowers were suspicious, threatening, or practicing something that made traditional femininity nervous. What it meant: women once possessed the ability to read perfume as ideological statement, to understand that choosing moss over jasmine, earth over powder, forest over garden, was announcing values about femininity, acceptability, and whether male approval mattered. By 2017, IFRA oak moss restrictions removed the exact notes that made Aromatics Elixir smell like forests. With time, modern safety regulations didn't improve perfume. They eliminated the specific molecules that let women smell like nature instead of laboratories. What once lived in bottles that announced, "I smell like earth," and I don't care if you like it, was outsourced to reformulations that smell like safe approximations, and a quiet human ability to wear aggressively unfeminine scent disappeared completely. The 1970 fragrance industry wasn't selling uniqueness. It was selling the feeling of uniqueness when Cachet launched as the different fragrance, with aldehydic florals that smelled nearly identical to 10 other perfumes, except the name meant prestige and the marketing promised individuality. Mother didn't need blind testing to know Cachet smelled familiar. She smelled the aldehydic floral on her wrist at the counter, recognized notes from Chanel and Madame Rochas and Arpège, and years later realized the truth. Cachet wasn't actually different. The marketing just made difference feel more important than the smell itself, and she'd paid for the promise of uniqueness while wearing the same aroma chemicals as everyone else. Nobody admitted this sameness during purchase. She learned it through experience, the gradual awareness that different was marketing language, not olfactory reality, and that corporations had successfully sold identical smells as unique identities. What it meant? Women once possessed the ability to eventually recognize when perfume marketing sold feelings instead of scents, when different and unique were advertising copy rather than chemical truth, though this awareness came too late, after the purchase. By 2014, niche fragrance marketing perfected this deception by charging $300 for the same aroma chemicals in minimalist bottles. With time, modern perfume didn't improve honesty. It learned that women who wanted uniqueness would pay anything for it regardless of whether the juice delivered. What once lived in women who eventually smelled through marketing lies was outsourced to niche brands that still sell sameness as exclusivity, and a quiet human ability to demand actual olfactory difference disappeared entirely. The 1970s perfume name wasn't a gentle suggestion. It was tactical instruction when ambush meant surprise attack, and the aldehydic florals projected so aggressively that the fragrance arrived before the woman wearing it, announcing presence without words. Grandmother didn't need projection charts or sillage ratings to know ambush meant olfactory dominance. She felt the powerful aldehydic blast when her friend entered dinner parties 5 seconds before her physical arrival, understood the strategic deployment. Some social situations required commanding attention through smell before anyone saw you, making entrance impossible to ignore. Nobody taught this scent warfare. She learned it by observation, recognizing that certain women used perfume as territory marking, that heavy projection wasn't accident but strategy, and that ambush specifically was designed for women who wanted their smell to dominate spaces before their bodies entered them. What it meant: women once possessed the ability to read perfume as social strategy, to understand projection as power move rather than accident, to recognize that scent could claim territory and announce dominance in rooms where women weren't supposed to dominate anything. By 2021, considerate fragrances and scent-free workplaces eliminated projection entirely. With time, modern perfume culture didn't improve consideration. It eliminated women's ability to claim space through smell. What once lived in aldehydes that announced, "I'm here and you'll notice," before physical arrival was outsourced to skin scents that whisper apologies, and a quiet human ability to dominate spaces through projection was lost completely. The 1971 perfume marketing wasn't subtle about class aspirations when Raffiné launched meaning refined in French and delivered aldehydic Kypri oak moss that was supposed to smell like sophistication you could purchase in a bottle. Mother didn't need sophistication lessons to know Raffiné was selling class fantasy. She smelled the sharp aldehydic opening mixed with oak moss patchouli at the counter, heard the sales associate say it was for sophisticated women, and understood the transaction. Corporations were selling the idea that refinement could be sprayed on, that working-class women could smell like upper-class ones if they bought the right bottle, that sophistication was a product rather than something earned through education, travel, or lived experience. Nobody admitted this class performance. She learned it by observing, noticing which women wore raffiné to job interviews and dinner parties, understanding they were performing sophistication through scent because actual sophistication wasn't accessible any other way. What it meant, women once possessed the ability to recognize when perfume was selling class mobility through smell, to understand that refined fragrance names were targeting aspirations rather than delivering transformation. By 2015, luxury fragrance marketing perfected class fantasy by charging $400 for exclusive scents that promised belonging. With time, modern perfume didn't improve accessibility, it increased the price of aspiration. What once lived in women who recognized raffiné was selling class they'd never actually have was outsourced to niche brands that still sell sophistication as purchasable identity, and a quiet human ability to see through class performance disappeared completely. The 1970s drugstore perfume shelf wasn't supposed to carry French brands, but Chimère sat there anyway when Bourgeois brought aldehydic florals from Paris to American five and dimes, proving that geographic origin meant nothing when the same aroma chemicals worked everywhere. Grandmother didn't need country of origin labels to know French perfume wasn't magically superior. She smelled Chimère's aldehydic floral at Woolworth's, next to American brands using identical synthetic molecules, recognized that French perfume was marketing mystique rather than chemical superiority, and understood what the industry didn't want acknowledged, that perfume quality had nothing to do with where bottles were filled and everything to do with whether corporations decided to use good materials or cheap ones regardless of country. Nobody taught her to ignore geographic prestige. She learned it by comparison, realizing her nose couldn't detect Frenchness in Chimère any more than it could detect Americanness in Revlon. That national identity in perfume was story, not substance. What it meant: women once possessed the ability to smell through geographic marketing, to recognize that French, Italian, or American labels were prestige stories rather than quality indicators. By 2018, niche perfume revived geographic prestige with Italian bergamot and French lavender, commanding premium prices. With time, modern fragrance didn't eliminate geographic marketing, it charged more for it. What once lived in noses that recognized aldehydes, smelled like aldehydes regardless of origin country, was outsourced to marketing that convinced consumers molecules had nationality, and a quiet human ability to smell past geography was lost completely. The 1970s. Perfume name wasn't euphemism. My sin was confession when Lanvin kept the scandalous 1925 name through decades of changing morality, and the aldehydic floral inside became less shocking than the fact that women still bought bottles literally labeled My Sin and wore them to church, work, and family dinners. Grandmother didn't need moral permission to wear perfume called Sin. She smelled the bright aldehydic opening at the counter, saw the name on the bottle, and understood the generational shift. Her mother's generation had found the name scandalous and provocative, but by the 70s, Sin was nostalgia rather than rebellion, a name that used to mean something transgressive, but had been absorbed into acceptability until wearing My Sin to Sunday service didn't raise eyebrows anymore. Nobody explained this linguistic dulling. She learned it by living through it, watching how words that once carried moral weight became decorative, how sin in perfume names stopped meaning anything because constant exposure had worn the shock completely away. What it meant: women once possessed the ability to track how transgressive language became meaningless through repetition, to recognize when shocking names lost power through normalization. By 2020, provocative perfume names disappeared entirely when everything became either clinical or abstract. With time, modern fragrance didn't improve naming. It eliminated meaning altogether. What once lived in women who remembered when sin was scandalous was outsourced to numbered collections and made-up words. And a quiet human ability to recognize linguistic power, erosion, disappeared completely. The 1970s perfume name wasn't humble. Toujours moi meant always me in French, and the narcissism was intentional when Dana kept marketing it through decades as the fragrance for women who centered themselves unapologetically. Mother didn't need self-help books to know toujours moi meant refusing to apologize for existing. She smelled the aldehydic floral spice on her aunt's wrist at family gatherings, heard her aunt say, "I've worn it for 30 years and I'm not changing," and understood the declaration. Some women wore one perfume for life, not because they couldn't afford variety, but because olfactory consistency meant, "I know who I am, and I'm not performing different versions for different audiences." Nobody taught this scent as self-concept. She learned it by observation, recognizing that women who wore toujours moi for decades were making statements about identity stability, that constantly changing perfume meant you were still figuring out who you were, but one scent for life meant you'd decided and weren't open to revision. What it meant? Women once possessed the ability to read perfume loyalty as identity statement, to understand that decades of olfactory consistency communicated self-knowledge rather than inability to afford new bottles. By 2016, fragrance wardrobes and scent rotation became aspirational when beauty influencers owned 50 bottles. With time, modern perfume culture didn't improve self-expression. It made consistency look like poverty or lack of sophistication. What once lived in women who wore one scent for decades was outsourced to collections where no perfume lasted long enough to become identity, and a quiet human ability to be olfactorily consistent disappeared completely. The 1970s women's perfume section wasn't supposed to smell like forests. Woodhue broke that rule when Fabergé marketed sandalwood vetiver moss to women in an era when woody meant masculine, and women were supposed to smell like flowers, not trees. Grandmother didn't need gender-appropriate scent guidelines to know wearing woodhue meant refusing floral expectations. She smelled the dry woody green on her friend's wrist at a Saturday coffee, felt the absence of sweetness or powder or anything traditionally feminine, and recognized the rebellion. Some women were deliberately choosing to smell like wood, moss, and earth instead of roses and jasmine, announcing through scent that femininity didn't require floral performance. Nobody called it gender non-conforming. They called it unusual or earthy, or asked, "Is that men's cologne?" Because women smelling like forests instead of gardens made people uncomfortable in ways they couldn't quite articulate. What it meant: women once possessed the ability to read woody perfume as gender rebellion, to understand that choosing sandalwood over rose was making statements about femininity, nature, and whether women were required to smell decorative rather than earthy. The 1970s. American grandmother's dresser wasn't complete without Shalimar, the legendary 1925 French vanilla amber incense oriental that became synonymous with grandmother scent across America when the generation that survived the Great Depression hoarded bottles like critical survival supplies and wore the same fragrance faithfully from age 30 until death at 80. Teenage granddaughters didn't need perfume history lessons or fragrance taxonomy education to know that Shalimar meant old age, mothballs, and outdated femininity. They hugged grandmother reluctantly at Thanksgiving and Christmas holidays, inhaled the heavy vanilla citrus incense cloud that permeated her wool coats and floral print bedroom, and dismissed it instantly as ancient and irrelevant without understanding what Shalimar actually represented. That grandmother's generation bought one single expensive perfume once in their entire adult lives and wore it exclusively for 50 consecutive years because luxury wasn't casual consumption or rotating fragrance wardrobes. It was rare acquisition you preserved fiercely and rationed carefully and never wasted carelessly under any circumstances. Nobody taught this Depression-era perfume economy through explicit instruction or parenting advice. Grandmother learned it by brutal survival necessity, the economic era, when one bottle of Shalimar Eau de Parfum cost $12 in 1950, which represented an entire week's wages for factory women earning £1.70 daily. And making that bottle last 50 years meant using one single spray per day instead of the 3 sprays recommended on the package, applying perfume only to special occasions instead of daily wear, making luxury last through iron discipline and conscious rationing rather than through constant repurchase and replacement. The same bottle sat on her dresser for decades. She knew exactly how many sprays remained. She calculated how long it would last. She treated every application as a measured decision, not an automatic ritual. Perfume wasn't abundant. It was precious, finite, irreplaceable. What it meant? Women once possessed the learned ability to make single bottles last literal decades through careful rationing and strategic discipline to treat perfume as precious, non-renewable resource rather than disposable consumable commodity. By 2010, perfume became fast fashion when brands like Bath and Body Works and Zara designed bottles explicitly to be finished and replaced quarterly, with thin concentrations that faded within 2 hours and required constant reapplication. Modern fragrance didn't improve abundance or accessibility. It eliminated the cultural ability to make things last. What once lived in bottles that survived 50 years on dressers through careful measured use was outsourced to packaging designed to empty within 3 months so consumers would buy more, and a quiet human ability to treat scent as precious and ration luxury through discipline was lost completely. The 1970s bathroom wasn't just functional hygiene space. It became an olfactory laboratory when Youth Dew sat permanently on the edge of porcelain bathtubs, serving double duty as both wearable perfume and concentrated bath oil. And women discovered that adding spiced oriental fragrance directly to hot bath water meant their entire bodies smelled like deep amber spice patchouli for hours afterward without reapplication or fading. One bottle of Youth Dew bath oil lasted 4 months of weekly baths. The same woman would go through 3 bottles of spray perfume in the same period. The math was obvious. Oil absorption was more efficient, more permanent, and more economical than spray application, but it required knowledge of how skin absorbs lipid-soluble fragrance compounds and how heat opens pores to increase transdermal absorption. Knowledge women gained through practice, not marketing. What it meant? Women once possessed the embodied knowledge that perfume wasn't just spray technology, that oil-based fragrance, suspended in hot bath water, created olfactory permanence and sillage. Modern alcohol sprays couldn't match regardless of concentration. That scent could be absorbed into skin layers rather than sitting temporarily on the surface, waiting to evaporate. Modern perfume didn't improve technique or longevity. It monetized what grandmothers accomplished with one $22 bottle. What once lived in bathtubs that turned women's bodies into walking fragrance diffusers was outsourced to three product systems costing $400 that delivered no better results, and a quiet human ability to make one versatile bottle work three distinct ways disappeared completely. The 1971 perfume bottle wasn't trying to look expensive. Rive Gauche arrived in shocking bright blue metal spray cans that looked more like industrial paint aerosols than luxury French perfume, while the aldehydic green floral liquid inside smelled like frost, vetiver, and deliberate refusal to perform femininity through crystal bottles and gold-plated caps. Mother didn't need packaging education seminars or luxury marketing courses to know Rive Gauche was rejecting every perfume convention the industry had built over a century. She held the vibrant blue aluminum can at the Macy's department store fragrance counter, felt the cheap, lightweight metal that was supposedly holding expensive haute perfume created by Yves Saint Laurent himself, and immediately understood the radical statement. YSL was announcing that perfume value lived entirely in the liquid formula, not the theatrical packaging, that blue metal spray cans could hold world-class aldehydes and rare vetiver as effectively as hand-cut crystal bottles weighing 2 pounds, and that women who needed gold-trimmed packaging and silk-lined boxes to feel luxurious were completely missing the point of what perfume actually was. Nobody explained this anti-luxury luxury positioning through advertising or counter displays. Mother learned it by direct observation, noticing how Rive Gauche, in its bright blue spray, can sat on the same glass counter next to Chanel No. 5 in its iconic crystal bottle and cost nearly the same $35, proving empirically that packaging was pure theater and scent was the only substance that mattered. The aluminum can made the statement visceral. You're paying for what's inside, not the container it arrives in. The perfume doesn't care if you display the bottle on a vanity or throw it in a gym bag. Women who judge fragrance by packaging have been trained to value the wrong thing entirely. The scent itself reinforced the message: green, sharp, almost masculine oak moss and galbanum that refused to smell pretty or safe or appropriate for women who stayed indoors, a fragrance that announced movement and independence and rejection of traditional femininity along with rejection of traditional bottles. What it meant: women once possessed the cultivated ability to separate perfume quality from packaging luxury, to recognize that bright blue aluminum could hold the same rare aldehydes and aged oak moss as crystal bottles, costing more to manufacture than the liquid inside. That olfactory value lived in molecular composition rather than in gold caps and silk ribbons. By 2020, luxury perfume packaging became half the total product cost when brands like Tom Ford and Byredo competed primarily on bottle design rather than scent innovation. Modern fragrance marketing didn't improve focus on olfactory quality. It made packaging the primary purchase driver. What once lived in women who judged perfume exclusively by how it smelled on skin rather than how the bottle looked on Instagram was outsourced to visually stunning containers nobody actually opens, and a quiet human ability to value liquid over container disappeared completely. The 1972 perfume marketing wasn't targeting evening elegance or romantic femininity. Alliage launched explicitly as sports fragrance when Estee Lauder released an aggressive green Kypra built on oak moss and galbanum that smelled like crushed wet leaves, fresh-cut grass, and bodies in motion rather than women sitting decoratively still in climate-controlled living rooms. Mother didn't need athleisure marketing consultants or active lifestyle branding campaigns to know alliage meant rejecting sedentary femininity entirely. She smelled the sharp, piercing green moss opening at the fragrance counter, felt how it smelled nothing like the rose jasmine florals or soft vanilla powders or anything traditionally designed for women who stayed indoors and moved carefully, and immediately recognized the permission being granted. Some perfumes were explicitly designed for women who moved hard, sweated freely, and existed in outdoor spaces where traditional pretty perfumes would feel like lies about what women's bodies actually did all day. Nobody called it athleisure fragrance in 1972 because that category didn't exist yet. Mother learned it by wearing it, discovering empirically that alliage smelled exactly right after an hour of tennis, or 3 hours of gardening, or any physical activity where rose jasmine perfumes felt like costuming and pretense about female bodies that never perspired or exerted themselves. The green oak moss and sharp galbanum held up against sweat smelled intentional rather than covered up, and announced that the wearer had been doing something physical rather than sitting still looking decorative. It was permission in a bottle. You don't need to smell like flowers, you can smell like movement and earth and effort and still be wearing expensive French perfume. The scent said your body's work was valuable, not something to hide under clouds of Shalimar. What it meant: women once possessed the sophisticated ability to match perfume to physical activity, to recognize that movement and exertion required fundamentally different scent profiles than stillness and decoration, that green moss kypres were deliberately designed for bodies that sweated and worked rather than bodies that sat passively, looking beautiful. By 2022, sports fragrances disappeared entirely as a category when everything became all-day and multi-purpose and designed to work in every context simultaneously. Modern perfume didn't improve versatility. It eliminated activity-specific scent and replaced specialized formulas with bland compromises. What once lived in women who instinctively knew tennis required different perfume than dinner parties, who understood that gardening demanded green kypres while evenings wanted orientals, was outsourced to single generic scents that worked adequately in every situation but excellently in none, and a quiet human ability to match olfactory signatures to movement and context was lost completely and never recovered. The 1977 perfume launch wasn't just controversial, it was deliberately provocative when Yves Saint Laurent named a fragrance opium and delivered spice amber vanilla so heavy and addictive that the name became literal while protests erupted over glorifying drug addiction, and YSL responded by making the controversy central to marketing. Mother didn't need scandal marketing to know opium meant transgression as product. She smelled the overwhelming spice amber at the counter while reading newspaper articles about protests and boycotts, felt how the fragrance actually did smell addictive, impossible to stop smelling your own wrist, heavy enough to cause headaches, sweet enough to crave despite discomfort, and understood what YSL had discovered, that naming perfume after illegal drugs and making the scent match the addiction was brilliant provocation that made every purchase feel like participation in scandal. Nobody admitted they liked the controversy. She learned it by observing, noticing that women who wore opium enjoyed the shocked reactions, that scandal had become purchasable, that perfume could make you feel transgressive without actually breaking laws. What it meant: women once possessed the ability to recognize when perfume was selling scandal as identity, when controversial names were marketing strategy, and when wearing a fragrance meant participating in manufactured rebellion that felt transgressive while remaining completely legal and corporate approved. By 2023, provocative perfume names disappeared when brands feared cancel culture. With time, modern fragrance didn't improve risk-taking. It eliminated controversy entirely. What once lived in bottles named opium that let women feel dangerous was outsourced to safe abstract names, and a quiet human ability to participate in perfume scandal was lost completely. 30 perfumes. 30 pieces of evidence that fragrance wasn't always something you wore because algorithms recommended it or celebrities endorsed it. 1970s women selected scent using Charlie, Jovan Musk, Halston, Jean Naté, Love's Baby Soft,